Unlearning proposes that new ways of learning can only be acquired when individuals unlearn those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors that prevent us from fully flourishing in the world.
2 weeks into this course, my heart already knew that my entire viewpoint on humanity was going to change.
During the years that I've worked with Taryn, she has assisted me in seeing the potential as an individual, and the course has changed my life for the better. I am the person that I am today because of the course that I enrolled for.
I've been lecturing the content for 7 years, and every year I am in awe of students who share how the content has transformed them both academically and personally. I believe that the world right now is in desperate need of an education that equips individuals with both academic and personal development skills.
Before this course happened, I used to hate people from the bottom of my soul. But after this course, for the first time in my life, I can say that I no longer hate people. I can finally say that I no longer see people for their circumstances, but rather for who they are as people and who they can become.
The things that I learned in my early childhood about who I was not and who I was supposed to be. However, the course showed me the true identity of myself. It showed me that it was okay to be vulnerable. It showed me that it was okay to heal. And throughout the course, I have grown tremendously.
And the Unlearning course does that. I realized that the content was so powerfully transformative that it would be irresponsible, that it would be selfish for me not to share it with the world. Unlearning is really a course that I've been lecturing for 7 years, but I've made it bigger, I've made it better, and I'm excited to incorporate the performing arts. I do not believe that unlearning needs to be clinical and boring. We can also make unlearning entertaining and fun.
To anyone that would want to enroll in this course, it will not only benefit you academically, but also individually. It will assist you in presenting yourself as the true individual that you are, but it will also assist you in healing and journeying the life process.
This course was the missing puzzle piece that I needed in my journey of self-transformation and self-discovery. And most of all, this course taught me how to unlearn this toxic behavior and how to choose happiness and positivity in the present and to stop worrying about tomorrow.
The gift of this course is that it is universally applicable to any personal and professional context. Cornerstone, learn to change the world.
In this time of great uncertainty, there's one thing you can be certain of: your education. Our wide range of online programs let you upskill yourself and earn a leading-edge qualification from the comfort of your own home. We've been educating Africa for 50 years, so we know how to adapt to our forever changing landscape. Learn to change the world and take control today. Speak to one of our student advisors. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to enroll now.
Looking at one particular topic in each show and spending 2 hours taking a deep dive into this issue. The chosen issue for this evening is the topic of climate change, a very thorny, hairy topic, very complicated for lots of people. Most people I know, when you even raise the issue, prefer to talk about other things, not really want to engage. However, because we have chosen to deal with some of the most difficult questions in society, the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues from our little studio in Salt River at Bush Radio, we're going to be looking at the issue of climate change this evening. I hope you stay with me. I hope you join in the conversation. You can reach us on Facebook Live, where we're broadcasting live at this moment, and you can also communicate with us via WhatsApp. I'll be sharing the number a bit later. Climate change, yes, the headlines in recent years, ever increasing warnings about the state of the planet. I myself have been aware of this problem for about 2 decades now, and for a long time thought that I was alone in the world, or I felt very alone at certain points in my career, talking about and trying to raise awareness about this issue. In the last few years, however, I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a huge resurgence in the climate movement, in climate change activism. And I think to attribute it to any one person, it would have to be a young lady named Greta Thunberg, who decided to stop going to school once a week, every week on a Friday, and basically sparked a global movement of young people who have felt bold enough, emboldened by her actions, to make their voices heard in the halls of power. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, I think before COVID, she was seen being very angry at the politicians and the policymakers who, if you were to, on balance, look at things, have done very little since these problems were first pointed out to them. And so in the studio this evening, we have 2 young climate activists. I don't want to call them young. They seem to have been in this space for quite some time. So they are quite experienced, but they are young in, let's say, human years, but long in the space of activism to raise awareness about climate change. Sibusiso Mazomba, sitting in front of me, is a marine biology student, also a student in statistics and oceanography. Is that one course, Sibusiso? Or is it a number of different things that you're doing?
Just 3 majors, yeah.
Okay. You're doing 3 majors.
Mm-hmm.
In different...
No, the same department.
I see.
Yeah.
All in, is that oceanography?
It's biological sciences.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sibusiso is part of the Youth Policy Committee in the Climate Change Working Group, where he creates and lobbies for responsive policies to the climate change crisis. And he's also a member of the African Climate Alliance. He is he's going off at the end of October to possibly one of the most important climate change conferences happening in the present time in Glasgow, Scotland. The COP26 talks, where the entire world is going to descend and once again try to figure out a way out of this mess. We're going to also be speaking to Michelle Maka, who is on my right over here. Michelle Maka is a Cape Town-based Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science and Applied Mathematics student. Oh my goodness. What is She's a debater and an activist, and she's spreading the word about the climate crisis and related issues among the youth. She is the educational coordinator at the African Climate Alliance, which is an organization a few years old, now demanding that leaders and political heads be accountable in dealing with the current climate crisis. And then on my left, we have Thulani Dube, who is the departmental lead at the Cornerstone Institute, Department of Business Studies. He's joining us. He's going to, I guess, try and shed some light from a young business perspective on the very divergent topic of climate change, because we often hear that business is often the cause of some of the problems we see in the world. But one would say the generally extractive approach that most businesses have to the environment, seeing it as a resource and not something that needs to be replenished or taken care of. And so Thulani is going to give some perspective from that view, business, and how business may or may not be a solution, or could it be, maybe not, you never know. So we'll get to that at some point. Later on in the show, we're going to be joined by Marcela Guerrero Casas, who is the program lead at the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. She works on issues related to resilience, waste, food and climate change, and she was born in Bogota, Colombia, and has lived and worked in South Africa since 2006. She is a co-founder and former managing director at Open Streets Cape Town. I think lots of Cape Townians would remember that. She's a frequent contributor to the Daily Maverick on public space issues, and she's a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Council on Mobility. So we're going to be talking to her a bit later on the topic of, I guess one would call it the psychological effects of climate change. Many people are suffering various forms of, let's call it awakening around these issues. And so I think Marcela can talk to us about that a bit later in the show. To begin with, I'd like to start off by maybe directing a question to the youngest member of the panel, who is Sibusiso Mazomba. Just tell us a bit about yourself, Sibusiso, and where, maybe if you could pinpoint where your climate activism all began.
Yeah, so thank you for having us here. My name is Sibusiso Mazomba. I am originally from Soweto, studying at UCT, as you said, doing marine biology, statistics, and oceanography. I think, growing up, I've always, tried to bring to the awareness of my peers around me, issues that we face in society. And coming up from Soweto, which is like a predominantly disadvantaged community, I saw around me, how, people were struggling, people were suffering, to, come up and support themselves, to get the most basic of needs. And going to a school in the suburbs, traveling every day between Soweto, which is like this very disadvantaged, poor community, to the suburbs where, everything is just much more eloquent and people, are much more self-sufficient. I saw it was this inequality that, is...
Yeah, the contrast.
In our communities and our societies. And that really just awakened me to how much that is, the inequality that is prevalent in our society. And, very recently in 2020, I was, I learned about climate change. And that sort of questioned me to, think about how does the inequality that we have in our society, how does that link to climate change? What will climate change do to this inequality that we already have? And what will it do to my community and the people that live in my community? So, I did a lot more research, joined a few organizations, the South African Institute of International Affairs, where I participated in Model UN, just, dissecting different issues of governance, different topics on, sustainable cities and gender and climate change. And that sort of, propelled me to really try to, be the change that I wanted to see in my community and try to bring that to my peers as well. So I joined the Youth Policy Committee, where we now work on policies, try to make sure that those policies there, responsive to climate change. Mm-hmm. And also joined the African Climate Alliance, which is like an organization that is made up of mostly young people that are trying to, catalyze that change in their communities. Mm-hmm. And so we're currently part of a task force, a campaign that is, trying to raise awareness around the impact that mining and coal power stations have on local communities and the health implications for them.
Fantastic. We'll come back to that a bit later. I'd like to hear some more detail from you a bit later, Sibusiso, on some of particularly the issue of mining and how that has impacted people's lives. Michelle, I'd like to talk to you about your background in the climate change movement. How old were you when you first became sort of sensitized, I would guess the word is, to this particular issue? What was that moment? Was there a moment, or did it happen over time, or how did you encounter the issue of climate change?
Difficult, question to answer, because I always make it a point to make people understand that I don't come from a family which wasn't sensitive about the environment or things like that. Like, I'll always say, like, my grandmother, my late grandmother, would knit things and crochet things out of plastics, and I saw this growing up. My grandmother on my mother's side now, she is the most creative person. She's always sort of finding ways to use things, right? And so through that experience, you just sort of always are in this space where you're almost aware that you can use things, or things have more lives than what we make of them. And then, so I'm originally from Zim. I moved here when I was 11, and I've been living here ever since. And when I was in high school, I got into some, I want to call it trouble, but we
as one does when you're in high school, it's always good to get into a bit of trouble.
It was more of talking around some of the issues that were affecting a lot of us as black students at this one school that we were going. One issue would be the issue of the code of conduct. The hair should not be past your shoulders. Like, as you can see, my hair goes up. And so that wasn't really sort of resonating. And so that, I would say, that's when my activism sort of started, when I was like, well, this needs to reflect your demographic. You can't have one thing that is only serving one sort of type of person. And then I left high school, and then I ran into some problems with sanitary ware, and so I was looking for alternatives, and that's when I stumbled through like cloth pads, and it was a whole thing. My mind was just blown away, and I started doing research. I asked my grandmother, I asked my mother, and they were like, well, we always used to use cloth. And this issue of disposable sanitary pads, which again is an issue that is directly tied to climate change.
You mean the waste and the profusion of
exactly.
this item in the environment, and the persistence, I guess.
Exactly, and how the disposable sanitary ware that is currently dominating the market is made up of mostly plastic. And that sort of bothered me, and then that's when I started doing a lot more research. So I got into the space through that, I want to say. So I started looking into it, and then I started doing research, and a lot of the people who were talking about it were people who didn't look like me, sound like me, or come from where I came from. And so I stepped into the space, and I was like, I want to be that one person who speaks about these things that actually relate to people. Because I started now coming across people who would say, well, instead of using a coffee cup, you should be using a mason jar. And I was like, I don't go for coffee a lot, so why would I have a mason jar? And I realized, well, we live in South Africa. You cannot tell a person to have a mason jar when they barely go for coffee. Do you know what I mean? And so that's sort of how I got into it. And then I stumbled upon ACA, and I've been with them ever since. And now I'm like the education coordinator. It's
fantastic. We'll talk a bit more about your actual work that you do for them, and how that's going. And again, by way of introduction, I'd then like to turn to Lani Dube, who comes from the business faculty at Cornerstone Institute, which is the partner in this series of talks, the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. Tulani, from where you're standing as a business educator, someone who's teaching the next generation of young business people coming up in the world, do you find that there is a awareness of the impact that business has on the environment and climate more broadly? Do you think young business people are thinking more about issues of sustainability and all of those things, or is it all about making profit?
Hi Ryan, thanks again for the invite, and good evening to the viewers. I think if we the issue of climate change, I think from an African perspective, is a very tricky one, because we're dealing with diverse socio-economic issues. I mean, if we take it to talking business really, and you look at big business, they have a lot of businesses have undertaken to reduce their carbon footprint as such, because they can do that. They're governed by, I think, the Paris Climate Accord. But you take and this is mostly America and Europe, they can do that. You take the African business, it becomes a lot difficult to do that because of the socio-economic dynamics that are there. So this is not to say that business is not aware of that. I think they are very aware that they need to reduce their carbon footprint, because what has happened with the issue of climate change is that it's kind of taken a twofold direction. Obviously, there are the physical repercussions of climate change. Then there are the repercussions that at times actually push businesses to change. So, for instance, changing consumer behavior. So, for instance, even when Michelle says the issue of sanitary pads intrigued her, and she gets to a point where she's actually saying, why are these disposable? So consumer behavior does, in my view, drive businesses to change. I think the change is very slow, especially on the African continent. But I think it's one of the major reasons that businesses are taking that shift.
So Busisa, how do you feel as a young person, or I guess maybe, but the question is directed at both of you. Do you feel that enough is being done? I mean, if you did feel that way, you probably would stop being an activist. But how do you see it from your perspective as a young person looking out on the world the next 80 years? I wonder, maybe if you can, because since you're a science brain, maybe you can walk us through the precise science of it, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So definitely not. I think our leaders have been very apathetic towards addressing the issue. There's been so much inaction, and we've known about climate change, as the world has known that climate change is an issue. I read a quote somewhere. It said that the people that are dying from climate change today, they were effectively killed in the boardrooms that where decisions were made 50 years ago. And so our leaders are not doing enough to address the issue. We have the global conference COP26. There's been 26 conferences, over 26 years of meeting and discussing and coming up with actions and ambitions, but then none of that is being followed through. Some of the urgency that we see right now, because then there was a resurgence in trying to address climate change. It's because young people realize that the older generation is not doing enough to try and address that issue, and we're the ones that are going to inherit the world of tomorrow. We're the ones who are going to live in the world of tomorrow, and so making sure that we account for that sustainability, account for that creation of resilience, and making sure that there's a systemic change in how society is, to try and align it to a socio-economic model that will allow for greater climate resilience in communities, because it's communities that are going to feel the impact harshest, especially in the global south. And so our leaders definitely are not doing enough, and time is running out to address the issue. We don't have much time. The IPCC report was released not so long ago, and it stated that if we continue in the path that we're going in now, then we're set for very not so great pictures. And so the science has always been there as well. The science is so clear, and it's not a matter of is the science right or wrong, but it's the reluctance of those in power to stick to that science and follow some of the the solutions that the science proposes. There was a very recent report that was released I think about 2 days ago, the BBC released like a report, and countries in the global north, I think it was Japan, Australia, and another country somewhere in the global north, they were trying to, tweak some of those results so that they don't have to, stick to the actions that the science is recommending. And so that that dichotomy between these rich countries trying to stray from that and not complying to what is there, what is so obvious, is really makes climate change a very ethical issue as well, because then it's countries in the global south that are the smallest emitters, the ones who are contributing the least to the problem, but then we're the ones that are going to bear the impact in the future. So yeah.
Tell me something. So just briefly, so you're studying marine biology and oceanography.
Yes.
So you have a particular interest and a particular sort of scientific lens, I guess, on what's happening with the oceans, right? Can you maybe just give us briefly what is happening in terms of the oceans as a carbon sink and all of that?
Yeah. So nature-based solutions, especially in the ocean, and how we can use the ocean to sort of reduce emissions is like also a big topic, because then climate change is impacting the coral reefs where there's so much diversity of life, and it's it's a whole
it's a cycle,
it's a cycle, exactly, yes. And so with climate change, that cycle is dying out, and so scientists are looking at how can we use our oceans as natural carbon sinks to capture the carbon at source, as a source of nature-based as a nature-based solution, to look to to try and address the issue of climate change.
Michelle, you are an educational coordinator at the African Climate Alliance. So part of your work is really taking the message across to young people, I would take it, mostly, trying to build awareness, knowledge. When you meet people for the first time or in a certain context, what is the level of awareness that you generally encounter among young people at this point?
From obviously community to community, but the general idea is that there isn't enough education around some of these issues, which is why maybe we'll get into it later on, which is why we're calling on the Department of Basic Education to make it mandatory for grades 1 up until 12 to learn about climate science and to be climate literate, because we believe, or I personally believe, that through education we're going to be able to build resilient communities. We're going to be able to build communities who look at some of these problems and are instrumental in solving the problems that they're presented with. So the level of awareness is not always there, but what I've noticed is, in a context such as South Africa, you are fighting against a lot of different things. You've got the poverty line, you've got unemployment. And so climate change seems to not be such an urgent matter, because am I going to eat tomorrow? Do you know what I mean? So it really is mostly about talking through it and actually making them understand that this is something that's here. Like there's a quote that I like. It says that the climate crisis is not coming, it's already here. And
it's just unevenly distributed at this point. Yeah. So so the thing is that I guess it's always about trying to make the connection between people's real lived experience and the sort of quite abstract thing which we call climate change. I mean, I think a lot of people, because for example, the increasing price of basic food can be connected to climate change. If there's droughts or floods or certain extreme weather events in certain parts of the world, and because we don't live, we're so disconnected from our sources of food, we don't really make the connection between increasing food prices and climate change.
Yeah, but I also want to mention that, so a lot of the times it's not only because of that, it's because a lot of people who speak about climate change and climate science are speaking to each other and not necessarily to communities, which is where the educational aspect of my work comes into, because now when you say climate change, what are you saying to someone who's never heard of climate change before? And so that is like a really great step in order to actually start these conversations and get communities talking about it, because I promise you, once they know about it, they're going to care. But yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for enlightening us on about all of these things. I want to move on and play a song. I think there's lots of music that has pointed to the climate crisis. There's poetry. There's the environmental crisis has been at the front of the concerns of many creative people in the world over the last 30, 40, 50 years. But right now I want to play a piece of writing, really, which has always stayed with me over the years. It's quite a moving piece of writing, and it's by an astronomer named Carl Sagan. You may remember it, and he basically wrote this when we got the first humanity got the first pictures of the Earth arising, basically from space, or from, I guess, from the moon or from space. The Earth rising over the moon back in the 60s, and Carl Sagan composed this piece of writing, which really speaks to a lot of where we're at this point in the history.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
That is the astronomer Carl Sagan, who wrote that very moving piece in the 1960s, early 70s, when he viewed the planet Earth as a pale blue dot stuck in a corner of the universe. If you are a sort of a person of a more scientific bent, you're a believer in the notion of the Big Bang and evolution, you would, I guess, be aware that so far there's no other intelligent life has been discovered in the rest of the universe, and so Carl Sagan's piece of writing really points to that significance, the significance of our insignificance in the whole universe, and also the I guess the special nature, the miracle of our existence in the vast expanse of space and time. Right now we're going to be talking to Marcela Guerrero Casas, who is the program lead at the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. She works on issues related to resilience, waste, food and climate change. Marcela is from Bogota, Colombia, and she is the former managing director at Open Streets Cape Town. Marcela, are you on the line? Marcela? Hello? Marcela, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you there? Can you hear me now?
I'm here.
Okay. Marcela, and tell me, so a few weeks ago you wrote an article in the Mail and Guardian, no, it was the Daily Maverick, about the issue of climate grief. Can you tell me a bit more about the research that was done that led to that article? Marcela? Marcela, are you there? Hello? Marcela, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Did you hear my question?
No.
And the question relates to an article that you wrote a few weeks back about the matter of climate grief, especially as it's felt by certain people, young people, I would guess, as a demographic, feelings of anxiety about the future, feelings of despair. Can you tell me a bit about the research that went into that article?
Sure. So I have a very strong interest in public space, and I was very curious to understand how public space can be a tool to tackle mental health in the context of climate change. So with that in mind, I reached out to some of the people who are doing the work, some researchers. There was a recent report by the Center of Environmental Rights specifically on this topic, so it was very timely. And in talking to people, it became very clear to me that, this is a collective problem. That one of the challenges when we think about mental health is that there is an individual situation. And even though we do experience, eco-anxiety and all kinds of pressures as a result of environmental degradation, it is the collective that suffers. And by in that same way, it is a collective that needs to respond. Because as my fellow speakers have pointed out, it is the underlying social ills that make climate change such a threat to people who already live in vulnerable conditions. Mm-hmm. So to me, the mental health angle is so broad. My understanding is that, the science is still sort of kind of emerging in this space. But there is evidence that everybody is suffering, as you said, psychologically, and in terms of our emotional response to the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, from a sort of a group psychological level, most people tend to fall into a place of denial, I would guess, denial of the facts, or kind of a pushing away of the facts? They don't really want to confront it, but there's sort of maybe a nagging feeling that you have that something's not right, and maybe this is not how things should be. Do you think that people tend to repress their something that scares them?
I think you're right, and I think that's an emotional response. If I think about myself, I don't like to confront those difficult life questions or problems or challenges. And the example that comes to mind, to be very practical, is waste. If you think about how society relegates waste to a landfill, we throw it away, forget about it, pretend it's not there, and it's not until we go to a landfill, which I did a couple of months ago in Muizenberg at the Coastal Park site, that you realize what we're doing, not just to the to the environment, but to ourselves. you know, because there are all these repercussions on other people, you know. So yeah, I agree that there's a sense of avoidance, but I think, and in this I agree very much with what Michelle said, is that part of the challenge is that there isn't enough dialogue and enough conversation, not just amongst scientists and policymakers, but with the regular public. And I think it's there where we start to sort of understand, you know, kind of dispel some of the myths and in a way to confront our fears, you know, as a society, that we can start to kind of face this and not feel that we need to turn a blind eye or avoid the conversation.
I want to turn the conversation just quickly to Tulani right now. Tulani, Michelle was saying earlier on that she feels that not enough is being done, I guess, at the primary school level, high school level, to teach young people about climate change, to make people climate literate, I would guess the term is. And so you're campaigning, you're lobbying for the education system to change and to embrace climate education as part of the curriculum. Is that right? Yeah. So I want to turn to Tulani. I mean, you are dealing obviously with the young people who are a bit older. They've left high school and now they are setting off on a career path. Do you ever encounter young people who want to do business but maybe have sort of environmental concerns? I often find that people seem to be quite divergent in their perspectives on things. You know, people get very stuck on like, okay, well, I'm going to be a business person, and that means I can't care about the environment, and I'm not concerned. And then you get the tree huggers, and they sort of relegated to the tree hugging group, and they never speak to each other, and there's certain almost an animosity about between themselves. Do you find that there's any kind of sensitivity among your students about the environmental issues?
I think it's a common misconception that once you go business, all you care about is the economic, is sort of like the profits. And I don't blame the world for having that misconception, because many boardrooms have really, you know, sort of like gone the profit route rather than the taking account of the humanitarian aspect of things. So I think it's a misconception, but I think what we really need to do to kind of drive away from that misconception, or because even the fact that you ask the question means it's a real thing. You know, when I started off at Cornerstone, I was referred to as the business guy, you know, and my religion was not even considered. Like, you're like the business guy. There's a lot of things that are not considered because you're the business guy. But I think once we go back to the grassroots, just of educating people and also educating companies, because in all this, like for instance, when we talk climate change and the effects, right, we'll have a humanitarian cost and an economic cost. And mostly what a lot of businesses will do, will look at the economic costs, and that's what's highlighted in business reports, in your annual reports, and not consider the humanitarian cost to it. So for instance, just take flooding alone, right? So climate change does lead to flooding, change in weather. That's a scientific fact. I think there's a report that was brought out by, I think it's Zurich, for the World Economic Forum, I think a few years back, and they estimate 250 million people globally are affected by floods, right? That's a humanitarian cost that we need to link the education to say, this is the problem, it emanates from here. So we know what the problem is, but we're not linking it to global, to that aspect. If you look at floods, then you have waterborne diseases. So I think it just comes down to just the basics of just educating. And again, to agree with Siso, I don't think a lot of us are doing what as much as we should, because again, it becomes an issue of, it's a bit of a socio-economic play here to say, you know, what will it cost me personally? Am I making enough money to be tree hugger, for instance, as you put it. You know, so I think those are the aspects. But I think ultimately, the students I've dealt with, because of the history we've had as Cornerstone, coming from a Christian core background, and it's always been perceived as a more Christian organization, although it's now secular. I think are very in touch with issues of social justice. That's one of the beliefs and the values of the organization. So I think a lot of them who get into this space already have a inclination to that. Social justice is a thing, and I think climate change, although it's not recognized as much, falls in that bracket.
Okay. So how do you feel? How do you feel towards? Are you're doing all the scientific subjects? You seem to be someone who's not really that interested in becoming a millionaire overnight. You have other concerns. How do you feel? How do you feel about the fact that how do you feel when you hear Tulani say that business is sensitive, or there is a growing sensitivity? Are you hopeful, or do you feel that business has solutions that it can offer to the environmental crisis, to the climate crisis?
Yes, so I'm actually part of I'm a youth, like a certain youth board member with the National Business Institute. So I sat in some of their board meetings. They were like devising their Just Transitions Pathways project, which will be presented at COP26 as well. And so I think, some of the points that came up is that across the world, it is apparent that, businesses switching to sustainability is, something that's really big right now, and something that's, more, sustainable and more profitable. And so there is that incentive for businesses to switch to sustainability. It shouldn't be seen as something that, is like this huge problem or
for someone else
a liability for companies. There are innovative solutions in waste. Our city centers have waste pickers who are young people most of the time, collecting waste, and they work under such difficult conditions, and yet they do 90% of the recycling that takes place. And so there is that, potential to, collaborate, businesses to work together. And often, because I, work a lot on policy as well, and, us young people, so we started with the South African Institute of International Affairs. We, embarked on a journey on devising the country's first ever national youth climate action plan, which is essentially like a policy, document that is co-drafted by young people across the country, trying to find solutions for climate change across cross-cutting themes.
When will we are we able to see that document? Is
yes,
it out already?
so the document has been launched. It was launched in the beginning of October.
Okay.
So if you go to the South African Institute of International Affairs website, you should be able to find the document there. But so it deals with like many themes on waste, on intersectionality, which talks to how we shouldn't see the climate change issue as something that is isolated, because it's not. It deals with
it's cross-cutting.
exactly. It's a cross-cutting issues that touches on economics, that touches on politics, that touches on issues of society. It's not a strictly environmental issue, which then what we're seeing with this disconnect from the larger sort of part of the public. They're not really engaging with climate change, because then to them it's this strictly environmental issue, but then we know that it's a wide-scale issue.
I remember reading a statistic somewhere, or I think it was around the time of the water crisis in Cape Town, where they said that the rates of domestic violence goes up with every degree of temperature that it increases.
Exactly.
So social issues that we may not see as connected are actually deeply connected to issues of climate change.
Exactly.
Marcella, I want to come back to you. You're at the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. Can you tell me a bit about what you are doing there, and what the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership is doing in relation to climate change, and some of the events that you guys have planned for the coming months and weeks?
Yeah, thanks. So we are an NPC, a not-for-profit company, and we specialize on partnerships in partnering. So I think a lot of what I'm hearing today as well is that, yes, all these problems seem separate, but, they are all in the same problem that we have to address. And sometimes what fails is the lack of collaboration. So at the EDP, we work with public sector, private sector, civil society in convening dialogue and finding new ways of working. That's ultimately what we do. In terms of climate change, we are working with the City of Cape Town on the recently launched Climate Change Action Plan, obviously, which is a very ambitious document, and I'm sure that my fellow panelists have probably taken a look at the number of actions that are proposed. And, the bottom line is that they are not going to be possible unless we come together as private, public, civil society sectors. And so we work on that. But what's coming up that's of relevance to this conversation is that we have a future casting webinar that we organized with the resilience unit at the City of Cape Town. And we're going to be talking about how mental health features in both the climate change action plan and the resilience strategy, and very specifically about what does it mean in practice. Because I have heard over and over, and particularly from younger people, that there are lots of talk, there are lots of promises, great policies, but at the end of the day, it's unclear what's actually being done. And so we're really hoping that this conversation is going to bring up some practical ideas. Leonie Dubert is the facilitator of this session, somebody who's worked in this space for a long time. An invitation to everybody is open to the public. It's the 12th of November, and it's online. So
people can just sign on to, where would they find the website to sign on?
You can find that on our website at the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, wcedp.co.za. And I will also make sure to send you a link so you guys can also share it on your social media platforms.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Marcella, we're going to leave you right now and possibly come back to you a bit later in the show. But we're going to take a commercial break right now and come back to you, let's say, in about 40 minutes again. Thank you so much for your time. And you're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues on Bush Radio 89.5 FM. And we are talking all things climate change ahead of the COP26 conference happening at the end of this month.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest.
For those of you out there
But
feeling
for us,
that you missed your
it's
chance
different.
at getting a higher education, there's still time. Make 2022 your year and grab the chance. Whether you're after a degree or a higher certificate, Cornerstone Institute offers an extensive range of programs from psychology and business to community development and education. With so many options, your future couldn't be brighter. Applications are now open, so visit cornerstone.ac.za today to enroll. Your future starts at Cornerstone.
Learn to change the world.
By enrolling at Cornerstone Institute, you are choosing to join a learning community to change the world. We offer degrees, short courses, and certificates.
I'm gonna
Go
come
to
back.
cornerstone.ac.za or visit our campus to enroll. Change begins here.
Learn to change the world.
Cornerstone is registered with the Department of Higher Education and Training as a private, not-for-profit institution.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues on Bush Radio 89.5 FM. I'm your host, Ryan Fortune, and we are deep in a discussion around climate change. It's the topic that you will often see mentioned in the newspapers, increasingly at the top of news bulletins, possibly in relation to extreme weather events around the world happening, and it is something that is always often, I guess, maybe with a lot more people than we would acknowledge, something always at the back of your mind, a nudge, a sort of a question about what does the future hold for us? What does the future hold for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren? I find that one of the things is sort of in my years of thinking about the issue of climate change, that a lot of it has to do with our disconnect from nature. I guess we live in this modern world in a sort of a hyper-technological age and time, and we often don't understand or really have a sense of our deep and our profound dependence on nature for our sustenance, for our clothing, for our lives, really. And so this gives us, I guess, either a blind spot, or often quite intentionally we don't really find time to have concern for the planet that gives us life. I want to talk to you, Michelle, about your work at the African Climate Alliance. How many schools? What does that actually entail? Are you going out to schools and then engaging with young people?
So those are some of the plans that we have from the coming year. So a little bit of history about the African Climate Alliance is that it was a movement. It started out as a movement, I think it was in 2019. It was just a bunch of kids who came about and they were like, we're going to march for climate change and we need to speak about it because the adults aren't doing enough, and so we were taking it into our own hands. And so as the movement started to grow, we saw a need to establish an organization that would have more of a structural approach to some of these issues. And so, due to COVID-19 and a lot of different things, we haven't really been able to go out to schools yet, but that is definitely something that's in the works. So the alternative to not being able to go out was we have a few programs that we're currently running. The one is the Back to Basics workshop. What this workshop aims to do, it's a monthly work that we have, and it's mainly been on Zoom. And what it aims to do is to really break down some of the climate jargon and everything that a normal person would not understand unless they're in the space. And immediately after that, we would have what we have dialogues. So that's a webinar, and what we aim to do with those is take whatever we would have broken down in the Back to Basics workshops, and we marry it with the science and the realities, and we really just bring experts out, and then we also bring like people who are living some of these realities and just have real conversations, because like we've been mentioning, we've seen that there's a big disconnect between the science and the regular Joe on the street. And so we are trying to patch that gap in order to make sure that, if I say climate change, say on the bus, someone understands what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So, and you're finding that, I mean, I guess how do you deal with it in your own family, for example? Are there still people, how did it, when you started to get into the space as a young person, what was the response, let's say, from your parents and your close family to you, starting to talk about these issues?
So when you're hit by eco-anxiety, the first thing that goes on in your head is the world is coming to an end unless I do something about it. And so what I did was I said to my parents, we need to go vegan, and we're going to be vegetarian, and a lot of different things that were not practical for us because we live in South Africa. But because it's such an integral part of our meal that to go vegetarian is a bit okay, whoa, what are you talking about? And so that was the initial reaction. And my parents were like, let's maybe talk about this. What are you saying? And then I started doing more practical things. I got a sewing machine and I started making reusable bags. So I said, no more plastic bags. We're going to use reusable bags. And so that we sort of gradually eased in each other into the space where they're very, very supportive. I mean, they've been supportive from the beginning. But it's just certain things that might not necessarily apply to every person living in South Africa. Like, you can't expect every single household to go vegan or to go to be vegetarian. Why? Because there are a lot of different issues that are associated with that. And so when I started doing more research, and I was speaking to the parents as well, and we realized that may not have been the best way for us to go about this, to actually bring about real change. I needed to be on the ground and actually dealing with people who were dealing with some of these things. And so my family has just been really great. I mean, you obviously come across any one person who goes, but the world is going to end anyway. I mean, that is not the conversation. The conversation is we are killing the environment, and that in turn will kill us, But that's been the experience thus far. Maybe we'll become vegetarian one day.
Sibusiso, so you're going off to COP26 in a couple of weeks. Are you excited about this prospect? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, obviously, going to another country, that is exciting. How we get there is a little bit problematic, and yeah, but I'm excited, very excited.
Mm-hmm. What are you? Well, are you going to be part of a delegation? It's a South African youth delegation.
Yeah. So I'm
what
part
sort
of
of
the
activities are you going to embark on?
Yeah, sorry, I'm part of the South African delegation. I'm going there as a youth delegate. So essentially, I'll be supporting the delegation who will be negotiating on South Africa's position on climate change and just representing the voices of young people at the conference.
Fantastic. So, listeners, we are talking about the issue of climate change, a very tough topic on a Thursday night in Cape Town with summer coming up and everyone looking forward to a wonderful season. But these are topics that really need to be spoken about because it makes no sense to turn away from them, to believe that they are going to fix themselves. Because we are part of nature, our actions, whether we choose to do something or not, our action or non-action has consequences. We are consequential beings. We have an impact on the planet for good or bad, not, I don't think, ever neutral. As soon as you start breathing and living in the world, you become responsible in some way for the impact that you have on the planet. We're going to take a break for music now, and this song is called Sankomota. It's by Sankomota. The song is Stop the War. Sankomota, the village pope, singing about the things we need to do to stop making war, I guess, on each other and also the environment. sounds of Sankomota and the song Stop the War, really talking about how we need to become more conscious, live in harmony, live in peace with each other and with nature. Stop the War on Nature by Sankomota. And in the studio this evening for the third episode of the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, it's just gone 8 o'clock, 3 minutes past 8 right now. And I'm in the studio here with a couple of young activists who are fighting the good fight, trying to raise awareness about one of the most critical issues of our time, that of climate change. I want to, at this point, go, I guess, if you're still with us and you're listening and you're finding this of interest, you haven't completely decided that it's so depressing that you'd rather be doing something else. If you're still there, I want to ask Sibusiso in particular to take us through some of the sort of scientific facts. Let's call them that, the scientific facts, not the alternative facts that are sometimes spouted by certain people, but the real facts about climate change in a very simple way, so that we can all understand and be clear about what is spoken about at these high-level meetings, one of which is taking place at the end of this month in Glasgow, Scotland, COP26, to which Sibusiso is going and going there to lobby for policy change on a macro level. So Sibusiso, can you just tell us about the actual science, the basic science of climate change, so our listeners are in the know?
Yeah. So some context. So climate change is, it's caused by emissions. When, power stations, vehicles, like our daily activities contribute to, emissions. Those emissions then pile up, and over time, it causes the climate to change. So climate refers to the long-term weather conditions. And when that happens, it's problematic because then, we've adapted to living in certain conditions. Plants and agriculture, they used to, a specific climate. So when the climate changes, it's a problem because then they can't adapt. And then, so a while ago, in the 1980s, countries came together to, work on a policy document that was called the Kyoto Protocol. Mm-hmm. The Kyoto Protocol, essentially, what it did is that, so scientists saw that, there was an emergency, the greenhouse effect, which is, the piling up of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere contributing to long-term warming. They saw that this was, contributing to a crisis, which is climate change. And so they came together to sort of, try to find solutions to that issue. And what came out of that conference was that they were going to, allow developing nations to, keep on, continue, emitting, not continue emitting, but then the industrial countries which were contributing more to that, they had to find measures to reduce those emissions. But then that wasn't, it wasn't binding, and so countries weren't committing to that. They weren't committing to reducing their carbon emissions. And then after that came the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, which essentially said that we have to reduce emissions. We have to, in order to, make sure that there aren't wide-scale, disasters, we have to stick to 1.5 degrees Celsius, not going above 2 degrees Celsius.
So just to be clear, it's basically the fact that the more carbon CO2 we emit, which is basically stored energy, the stored energy from millions of years ago of trees and leaves and all of that. I mean, that's really what oil and coal and natural gas are. They are the fossils from thousands and millions of years ago. And so we're burning these fuels at an accelerating rate to power our industrial societies. And that imbalance that's, I guess, that's caused in the atmosphere is what traps heat and leads to a sort of an energy
change
in the energy mix in the atmosphere, leading to all of these extreme weather events and long-term changes in the climate. Do you feel that as a young person, you're about 20 years old?
Yes.
Yeah, 19, 20.
20, yeah.
20. How do you feel when you think about the future, looking at where we are at present and having this sort of the scientific facts at your fingertips? How does it make you feel looking forward at the rest of your life going forward, if nothing bad happens to you before,
So, as I said, there hasn't been much urgency around commitment to the issue, and commitment to concrete solutions and implementation of those solutions. And so, as the world, if we move on in the direction that we're moving in now, then the world of tomorrow isn't going to be livable for.
Does it make you angry sometimes to think
very,
about?
very, very angry? Yes, it does. Because then the problems that are because of the actions of the current leaders, we're the ones who are going to then bear those the impacts of those decisions. And worse and more horrid is that we're not allowed at the decision-making table to come up with solutions and work together with our leaders. So it's like we're being excluded out of an issue that will affect us most as young people. And so that does create a lot of anger and a lot of concern for my future and the future of future generations.
Tulani, how does that make you feel? I mean, you're sort of in an in-between generation. You're not part of the generation. I think that's, if you were to apportion any kind of blame, an older generation. You're sort of in the middle, but you are a bit older than Sibusiso and these guys. Do you feel that you as a young person in the world, not as a business person, do you feel some kind of responsibility at all? Do you feel some kind of concern? I guess you're married with kids. I am not married. Oh, you're not married. So, but when thinking about your future and possibly the idea of possibly having kids one day and bringing them into a world that looks the way it's looking and seems to be going the way it's going, does that raise any concerns on your part at all?
I think it does a lot. I've been seeing it a lot. Firstly, I'd like to say I think the future is in good hands. When I listen to Sibusiso and Michelle, I think the future is in good hands if we can allow the youth to really come out and lead. I think that's the problem we're having I think at a policy level, at a government level, that's a big thing. Personally, I feel the old generation has kind of clogged the top and refuses to lead, which is why we're not having any innovative solutions. So I'm very big on that to say, look, the old guard should step down. I think they fought a good fight, I really do, but I think you need fresh blood. So when I listen to Sibusiso, to Michelle, I'm really encouraged at what the future holds. It is a bit, I do get a bit I'm not sure if the word's disappointed, but it's a bit saddening because what generations like Sibusiso are fighting against are big corporations who have the lobbying power. So if you go up against, and I shouldn't be naming companies' names, but firstly, I think what companies like Microsoft have done is they've really committed to reducing their carbon footprint. I think they've really gone the route of saying we're going to go green, to power our service, which is good. But no one is talking issues about the supply chain. So while big companies like Amazon and Microsoft are really committing to say, hey, look, we've committed to this, the supply chain is still very heavily fossil fueled. So I think that is, to be honest, I think it does bring concern to kind of raising kids in like the next 20 years, to say, how's this going to go? And we need to really take action. I think it's a war, for lack of a better word. We're not calling it what it is, but I think it's a war, and I think it's up to us. And again, I really would like the youth to really stand up and say, this is a war, we really need to engage in this, and not just go to conference after conference and talk about policies and policies and policies. I've seen it, but again, I think we are in good hands. So I am happy at one level that we've got a young generation coming up that is
super aware of these issues. Yeah, I think, a lot of the time, I often, as I get older, can be quite crabbish towards young people for being, always on their phones, on their TikToks, and not being concerned about all of these issues. But here in front of me, I have two young people who could be spending their lives doing anything else they wanted to, but have chosen to take on this very critical issue for humanity, and are joined by thousands, I guess hundreds of thousands of young people around the world at this point. I saw there was a couple of weeks ago, there was another big global demonstration. It seems like people are now coming out of the COVID slump in terms of taking their concerns and their grievances out into the streets and making their voices heard. I just want to come to the question, I guess, now of something that has always sort of concerned me. And I think it's fantastic that in the studio right now we're all people of color, because I've always felt growing up, let's say in the last 20 years, that the environmental movement has a representativity problem or a diversity problem, where often, you look at organizations like, well, I won't name names, let me not name names at this point, but certain very large environmental organizations are often dominated by people of a certain class and ethnic background, that seems to really, when one thinks about it, the fact is that I think people of color are disproportionately affected by issues of poor environmental issues, and therefore at the brunt of certain corporate activities that really put them at risk. So you mentioned earlier on that you were dealing with some of these issues in relation to the mining sector. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What exactly is happening there? Where are you dealing with issues, and how is that going?
So the project, the campaign that we're running with the African Climate Alliance, it's rooted with, it was in line with the Uproot the System movement, where we were calling on the Department of Mineral Resources to not build more power stations, more invest more in fossil fuels, because then in their policy document, the Mineral Resources Framework, they've committed to divestment from fossil fuels. But then they're going against that because now they're building more, power stations, investing more into fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. So we came together as young people, to acknowledge that, this is a direct attack on, the most vulnerable in our communities. South Africa is a very unequal country. And so continued investment in fossil fuels, jeopardizes the future of, grassroots communities who are, most of the time living next to these power stations. And their health is impacted, and the children that live in those communities, there isn't investment in making sure that they're capacitated to participate in the conversation. You did say that the climate movement is very exclusionary, and that is very true, because then voices of color, voices from poor communities are often excluded. When you think about sustainability, you think about this, veganism, fancy movement with, all these voices that, are not really
representative,
exactly,
that
are
don't
going
seem
to be
relevant to your experience. Yeah.
Exactly, they're not going to bear the impacts, but then we're the ones, who are, but then we're still excluded. So we just wanted to, bring across that point on education and trying to mobilize awareness around, the impact that fossil fuels has on these communities, and try to bring their voices to the table as well, so that they could also participate.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. You're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues on Bush Radio 89.5 FM, and I'm Ryan Fortune, your host. If you have anything to contribute, if you want to send us a WhatsApp message, you can send it to 061 862 1065, 061 862 1065. And we're talking in the studio here about climate change, taking a deep dive into the issue. And right now we're going to take a break and come back with more from our guests on this topic, which is becoming ever more critical in our communities, ever more critical in our lives. We are going to have to confront it, stop burying our heads in the sand, and get on with solutions. Community Champions is a new show on Bush Radio every Thursday at 9 p.m.
Cornerstone Institute CEO Noel Daniels is the host and chats with various community champions about their life, their work, their struggles, and the music that inspires them to keep fighting for a better world. Conversational and laced with humor, the show is part of a new collaboration between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, a private institute of higher learning in Cape Town, offering a range of on-campus and online programs in community development, psychology, business, and much more. If you're looking for inspiration on how to change the world, tune in to Community Champions on Bush Radio 89.5 FM with Cornerstone CEO Noel Daniels every Thursday at 9 p.m.
89.5 FM.
You're listening to Bush Radio 89.5 FM, and it's the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, episode 3 of this season. We've got another 11 episodes lined up for you. And the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues is a collaboration between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, which is an institute of higher learning in Cape Town, offering a range of programs from psychology to community development, business, and many more. If you'd like to sign up or join, go to the Cornerstone the Cornerstone website or Facebook page and make an inquiry. The applications for courses and the information, the course brochures are all available on the website, and you can find more information there. Tonight we're talking climate change. It's a topic that has come to the forefront over the last few years quite strongly. Cape Town a few years ago went through a water crisis with the risk, the danger of us running out of water completely. I don't know if anyone still remembers that. It was quite a thing. We were all panicked, slightly flustered, slightly concerned, couldn't flush the toilet for days. It was quite a thing. But we often quickly forget how these things have occurred. Time passes, and it seems to be that we just carry on with our lives and hope that things will never get to that point again. As we've seen the last 2 years, we've been in the midst of a global pandemic. Again, our lives disrupted in very profound ways. I must say that when the pandemic hit, there was a part of me that was slightly glad that it had put a spanner in the works of the global system of trade and commerce, because I thought that people always were flying around all these goods and all these presents coming around at the end of every year from somewhere because it's Christmas or Black Friday, and the sort of hyper consumption that we engage in this modern world, absolute wastefulness in a lot of ways. And so there was a part of me that was quite glad that things had ground to a halt. Obviously, and the pain and the grief that people felt when they couldn't get their parcels from certain big corporations delivering gifts. I felt that. I thought that was very painful for them. I'm really sorry about that, but really, yeah. So all of these things, obviously, very, very important as we live our lives in the last few months of the first year of the second decade of the 21st century. We are concerned about the future. We're concerned about pandemics, and I think that there is something quite significant when we think about climate change and the fact that the pandemic itself, when we sort of trace back into how it came to be, and if you're not a conspiracy theorist who believes that it was invented and formulated in a lab somewhere, it really is about human beings and our disturbance. If you believe the sort of the bat theory, the eating of the bat at the marketplace, if you believe that story, you would obviously then consider that the pandemic is really a symptom, once again, of our disregard for nature, of the fact that we don't know what's out there, and we disturb things that shouldn't be disturbed because we need things that we possibly don't need so much, but we think we do, and so therefore we destroy, and then there are consequences that we never foresaw. And so here we are. There are still things that happen in the world. The other day I saw there was a big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico once again. Somewhere in the world, a giant oil spill, and again pollution out in the world, and a corporation that seems to be going to get away with it. No consequences. And so I wanted maybe to turn to Tulani here and speak about the fact of business. I don't want to put business in the spotlight, but I think there is a kind of a sense that there have been moments in the history of the world where there was this notion of the triple bottom line. You know, that it was a sort of a fashion a few years back that you needed as a business person or as a corporation to be concerned about the social aspects and the environmental cost of your activities. What has happened to that in recent years? It seems to be not such a thing anymore.
I think it's there. It's really more ESG now as it relates to environment, social, and governance. So I think it's still there. It's not, and I'm happy to say a lot of organizations have taken to that. They obviously tie it into their governance reporting, you know. So you'll find a lot of organizations doing a lot of CSI work that speak to that. Although, again, I'm quick to say, when you really talked about the issue of climate change activism having a certain demographic or color grouping attached to it, it also affects how organizations put in funds into where they see best to fight the good fight. So for instance, you'll find a certain cellular network ensuring that the girl child is well taken care of or brought up in a certain way. That's their fight. So I think the issue is because we are dealing with a lot of socioeconomic issues that are diverse, and it then becomes difficult at boardroom level to say, how do we rank this as our number one? And as much as the issue of climate, I believe, should be right at the top because this is ultimately our home, at times when you're dealing with communities that have no running water, that have no paved roads, that don't have you access to basic stuff, the issue of climate advocacy at times becomes secondary because those communities wouldn't understand why you choose to go that route rather than put lights in their house or give them running water or give them a toilet. But I think a lot of organizations based on the ESG are doing quite a lot. It may not be seen in the area we're talking about now, but yeah, it's there. And also just to add, I think when I may not have solutions, but I would like to say as the business studies department at Cornerstone, the door is open if you need any assistance, Rosiso and Michelle. So I would like to make that pledge on air. So interestingly, we're running an entrepreneurship symposium next week, 2 days, right? Virtual, and one of the topics speaks to entrepreneurship in a circular economy. So how we reduce waste, which is basically what we're talking about now, and it was a very hard topic to put on the topics list because no one really was prepared to kind of talk about it. It's easier to talk about the pedagogical challenges of entrepreneurship. It's easier to talk about government and private sector partnerships. But once you try to say, how do we not waste anything when we're building in this entrepreneurial ecosystem? It's no one really has solutions, and no one I think a lot of people in academia, government, private try to shy away from that because it's a very tricky space to play in.
Do you think people feel some kind of complicity? I often find, all of us are complicit in some way. You know, it doesn't matter how environmentally conscious you are, how environmentally aware you are of how things are, where they're going. You are, just by your lifestyle in the city or in the world, you have end up having a bigger carbon footprint than you maybe should have. And so I think there's often a sense of, I guess, secondary guilt almost, or kind of a guilt that okay, well, you know, I don't really want to talk about those things because they're going to raise some questions, you know, or people are going to start pointing fingers. So I think that also may have something to do with it, you know. I may be wrong, but I've seen it in certain instances that this is the case. We're talking all things climate change on the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, and in the studio with me, my guests, Thulani Dube from the Cornerstone Institute Business Department, and we are talking to two young activists who are on their way in the space, who are working to make a difference in the world. Michelle, I want to ask you, are you hopeful about the future? This is always a question. I mean, at 24, you've obviously gone through quite a journey to...
21.
21 years old. 21 years old. You've gone through quite a journey over the last few years and really thrown yourself into all of this activism. When you think about things, are you hopeful that we can avert some of the things that the science says is on the way?
My hope is not in the science. Why? Because big corporations, government, and other leaders aren't really working. They aren't committing to changing our trajectory. What I am hopeful in, though, are young people who are coming together and saying we need to change the narrative. I always use myself as an example because, well, I'm me. But, you know, I saw, we spoke earlier on about representation in the space. And, you know, when you thought sustainability, you thought probably a tree hugger who happened to be white, who also walked without shoes, right? That's sort of the idea that you would get. But then I was like, hang on, I've been sustainable all my life. And what really is sustainability in an African context? And so I started exploring that, and you would find that there are so many other solutions, right? There's so many young people who are coming together and are saying, we have these solutions, this is what we're going to implement. And even if government does not listen to us necessarily, we are going to do this in order to make sure that other people either have access to the information or we build a future that works for us and everyone else, essentially, because it seems like we are the ones we've been waiting for.
I want to talk a bit about some kind of so the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership is doing an event in November looking at the futurescapes, throwing forward to what a more sustainable future might look like. And when you think about this future or a more sustainable future, what really comes to mind? I think, I mean, in the current sort of global context, I think you have people who believe that we are going to become an interplanetary species. We're going to fly off to Mars and colonize Mars and some other planets, and be able to sort of escape the Earth as it dies. And you have some other people who have a very different view of that possible future. You have certain people who feel that we're going to become merged with artificial intelligence and become sort of android people. And then you have other people with other sort of utopian visions. What is your vision of a more sustainable future when you think about what that could be?
We mentioned earlier, I think it was Siso who mentioned a just transition. And what that essentially is it's a transition from the current state of things in the ways that we're running our economies, even on a global scale. And the notion of a just transition is to say that, firstly, climate justice or climate change is not an isolated issue. It's also a social justice issue, or rather climate change is a social justice issue. And so when I think a sustainable future, I'm also looking at a just transition where we are centering people, right? We are saying we are not going to be able to make a decision that only sort of is to the benefit of a few. And when we really start to speak sustainability, we're building economies, we're building cities, we're building people who are able to participate in a circular economy where maybe waste doesn't exist anymore because we always have a way of putting it back. Hence the idea of a circular, economy or a circular system and a way of life. So a sustainable future for me looks like that. It looks like, access to education. It looks like access to resources. It looks like access to things that sustain one's life, but also sustain communities on larger scales, countries, as well as the global community.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Wise words from my guest here in the studio, Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, episode 3. And we are talking climate change. We're going to take a break for music now, and then we'll come back and talk more about possible solutions for the crisis that we face ourselves in, possible ways out. Maybe there's no escape, but we can make things better. We can still make things better as long as we are here. While there is life, there is hope. And this song is called What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Microphone. Sorry. Good evening, and that was the sounds of Marvin Gaye and What's Going On, already in the 1970s, calling attention to the climate and environmental crisis of our time. So it's a message that's been around for a long time, and we are now in the year 2021, and yet another climate change conference about to happen, this time in Glasgow, Scotland, where the world's leaders, environmentalists, business people are going to come together for a week in the Scottish city of Glasgow to try and find a way forward, to try and reach some kind of agreement on the steps that need to be taken and the targets that have to be reached in order to avert the worst of the climate crisis, which is in many respects already here, already having seriously negative effects on societies around the world. If you care to look more closely at certain things, you may see the signs of climate change in unrelated factors, civil war, civil conflicts that happen in various countries around the world. And so you'll see the fingerprints of climate change all over if you take the time to look and be more aware of where things are and how they are interconnected. We live in an interconnected world. Nothing is isolated. No man is an island. And so this evening we're talking about all of these matters and more. And on the line, I've got Marcela Guerrero Casas again, who is with the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership on the line. And Marcela, just to be clear again, the organization you work for works to bring people together around various issues that are of concern, of importance, and tries to find, I guess, play a bridging role between various organizations. And there was something that Sibusiso mentioned earlier on, the fact that a lot of the time it seems as if people are speaking different languages. The scientists are not speaking to the ordinary person. The business people are not talking to anyone except themselves. And it seems that there's a disjuncture, I would guess, in many areas of life. Can you tell me about how you are finding it doing this work with people, and how people actually becoming more, I guess, accustomed to working more collaboratively?
Yeah, it's not an easy process, and this is why it's a challenge in every sector. You know, obviously climate change is a very complex issue, and as has been discussed tonight, it touches so many areas of life. At the EDP, we work in various areas, and the example I can perhaps share is around food. And not to say that, that we've sorted it out, but we've gone through a really interesting process that started during COVID, when people took initiative. The Community Action Network started to set up kitchens around Cape Town and the Western Cape, and there was a sense that a conversation should happen. And a group came together, and it began. The Food Forum began in March 2020, and it's continued to evolve to not only look at food aid or food relief, but rather at the food system. And it is through those various conversations that those relationships are deepened. But I think that the point here is that it takes a while, and sometimes it takes a crisis. And so, you've mentioned the drought. I think COVID brought, a lot of suffering to not just our city, but the world around. But it also brought something special in communities around not just Cape Town, but even, in Gauteng. I know there were other community action networks that sprang up in those areas. And so I just, sometimes it's just about the timing. And it's certainly about persisting and acknowledging that this processes take a long time. I mean, we're talking about people who, work under various pressures, whether they're in, public service or in the private sector. And I think Tulani was mentioning some of those, things in terms of the business sector. So it's finding an opportunity to have a dialogue, to have, some sort of common ground. And as I said, sometimes crises do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Crisis often is opportunity. I find when we push to the point of against the wall, we have to come up with innovative solutions to the problems that we are trying to deal with. I'm always interested to understand, I guess, often, having been a person in the media and having been a journalist for a long time, the ways that people often don't really seem to be communicating very well. There's every sort of field has its own particular jargon that often works to keep people outside of the whatever's being spoken about. Business people have their own jargon, and climate change activists have their own jargon. Is there in doing the work that you do, I mean, how do you get people to even begin to think on the same page, or even be concerned about something and know that they're speaking about the same thing, and not be at odds with each other about things that maybe they don't agree on, and there's the assumption of agreement or that sort of thing?
Very often it's about creating the space. I think you would be surprised how much people desire to have those conversations, but there just isn't an opportunity to do that. And sometimes when people disagree, there's kind of a creative tension that emerges. But again, it's creating those spaces, and at the EDP, we strive to find those connecting points. It's not always simple. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it takes time. And one has to invest in the long term, because it's about the personal relationship, so the individuals who are in government at the moment and those who are in society, academia, etc. But it's also about the institutions. And once you create those pathways, the likelihood of new people coming into those roles, continuing those practices, are higher. But it definitely doesn't happen overnight, and we try and don't always win. So it's not a scientific sort of process. I think the human element must be
always a factor. Yes. Thank you so much, Marcella, for your time. That was very insightful. And again, if you want to go to the Futurescapes online event happening on the 12th of November, you can go to the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership website, and you will find more information there with us. So that was Marcella Guerrero Casas, a project lead at the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, talking to us about climate change and resilience and the work that they are doing there. Right now, back to the studio. We are continuing our discussion in the studio, and I really want to talk at this point and move the conversation to the question of solutions. Because often we get mired and we get stuck in the issues of the gloom and the doom. A lot of people often sink into that gloom and depression and wallow in it, and that's not really a place that you would want to stay in if you want to live a sort of useful, productive, beautiful life. So one of the avenues, obviously, I guess, for expressing our concern is a direct action, and this is something that's been going on around the world for the last since forever, but particularly in the last few years around the issue of climate change. Young people and older people blocking the streets, coming out into the streets, beating drums, making noise, and really making sure that they are concerned about things that perhaps their political leaders are not showing much concern towards. So I want to talk about solutions here. We mentioned earlier that there are young people, as you said, who are doing amazing things, and I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of these young people in some of the spaces that I've been. Looking at it from your perspective, what are the things, I guess, that maybe give you a semblance of hope? Let's talk about certain technologies, maybe. Forget about the human element for a minute, but certain technologies that you think are on the horizon that could mitigate some of the impacts of what's coming, that may take us off our dependence on fossil fuels, and maybe how you think some of those technologies could be applied in South Africa at all. Sibusiso?
I think, innovation is like a very, important part of addressing climate change. And I think, just to say, beyond technology, there are nature-based solutions that are available to us. Capturing carbon at source. So making sure that, our whole system is very linear. We, use something and then we it goes somewhere, and then we don't really think about we don't think about where it goes. And so bringing in the circular economy, there is the what are they called again? They called so where waste goes. So instead of making sure that the biological waste landfills, there you go. Biological waste, most of it goes to the landfills, and there is they already used I know in Europe they have some machines that they take back this biological waste into some machines, and they're able to generate electricity from that. So diverting that biological waste from landfills, there should be strict policy measures to make sure that it does not end up in landfills. Promoting a circular economy above all is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Michelle, what do you see giving you hope and maybe a sense of optimism? Is there anything on the horizon when you look out at the world, or things that you think already exist, technology that already exists that we maybe not applying at the scale that we should?
Absolutely. So when I'm not doing computer science and applied mathematics, I am doing data science, and the hopes is to gather the data that we have and use it to create a solution that directly combats climate change. And we're already seeing it right now. So if you're interested, you just sort of pop into Google data science uses to fight climate change. I don't really want to go into that, but it is a real tool that is being used in a very real way to fight against climate change. And there's so many ways, and I always circle back to education, because I do believe that the more educated, maybe not necessarily in a formalized way, but the more aware a person is, the better chances of them actually making decisions that are meaningful. And so if we look at technology as it stands, I think it was a couple of years ago, not more than 5, the Department of Basic Education was like, we're going to introduce robotics, right? Just as robotics. And I would be very, very interested to see some of the ministers go, how can we use robotics as a way to teach climate literacy? Because it's a very, very real thing, and it's a very possible solution to some of the problems that we have. So it's just in finding ways to make sure that these things link, because they do. So those are just some of the things that I think.
Thank you so much. That's Michelle Maka, who is the Education Coordinator at the African Climate Alliance, one of several. How many are you when we talk about education coordinators?
There's 2 of us.
2 of us.
Yeah,
okay.
and then we've got a youth coordinator, and then we've got communications and PR coordinator. Yeah, so those are some of the pillars that we're working with at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Michelle Maka telling us how she feels about the possible solutions that technology provides that can help us to solve some of these issues around the environment and climate change. We're going to take a quick break now, looking to the future and what's coming up. In the next show, coming up at 9 o'clock, we will be listening to Noel Daniels in Community Champions, where he will be in conversation for an hour with one community champion, talking about their life, their work, their struggles, and the music that has inspired them.
Is it your dream to go to varsity? Cornerstone Institute can help you. Accredited high certificates and degrees, online or on campus, part-time or full-time, psychology, community development, education, theology, and business. Visit our website, cornerstone.ac.za. Small classes, financial aid for those who need it, limited places. Act now. Email us at info@cornerstone.ac.za. Call us on 021 448 0050. Cornerstone, where you learn to change the world.
I'm going to take a break for music right now. A song that has always moved me, inspired me, and I guess millions of others around the world, by a singer who continues to inspire us all the time, so many years after his death. And this is the song So Much Trouble in the World. sounds of Bob Marley and So Much Trouble in the World from the year 1986. A long time ago, and things seem not to have improved very much, but we have to live in hope. We have to believe that the future can be better than the past. In the studio with me for the third episode of the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. We're about to end off now before we go to Community Champions with Cornerstone CEO Noel Daniels. So we're going to say goodbye to Michelle Maka from the African Climate Alliance, education coordinator there, who's working very hard to inform people, young people, about the climate crisis. Are there any final words you'd like to say, Michelle?
Believe in yourself, and you can be the change that you want to see.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Sibusiso Mazomba, who is on his way, a young oceanographer, marine biologist, is what they call it? Marine
biologist.
Marine biologist.
Yeah.
On his way to Glasgow in Scotland for the COP26. Are there any last words from you, Sibusiso?
Yeah, very briefly, rich countries, we're living in a time of crisis. The climate change it threatens to, destroy society as we know it. And so rich countries need to, show us where the money is. There was a commitment at COP15 to invest $100 billion to help developing countries, fight climate change. So that hasn't been happening. So, they need to show us where the money is and commit to concrete climate action.
Yes, thank you so much. Thulani Dube, any last words from you, from Cornerstone Business?
I think since there's a business focus to it, I'll try to just be quick and say, I think driving this, there should be strong legislation and two actions should be taken. One of either banning, which is really kind of impossible to do, and the other incentivizing companies to either do certain initiatives. And on the flip side of that, harshly coming down on those who don't meet those incentives with a charge directly proportional to their earnings.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Thulani. And that's all for tonight on the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, Episode 3.
That was the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, a collaboration between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, a private, non-profit institute of higher learning. Cornerstone Institute offers a range of degrees, certificates, and short courses in disciplines such as business, education, psychology, sociology, arts and sports management, community development, media studies, and theology. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to find out how you can learn to change the world. And join us here next Thursday at 7 p.m. on Bush Radio 89.5 FM for another installment of the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues.
Unlearning proposes that new ways of learning can only be acquired when individuals unlearn those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors that prevent us from fully flourishing in the world.
2 weeks into this course, my heart already knew that my entire viewpoint on humanity was going to change.
During the years that I've worked with Taryn, she has assisted me in seeing the potential as an individual, and the course has changed my life for the better. I am the person that I am today because of the course that I enrolled for.
I've been lecturing the content for 7 years, and every year I am in awe of students who share how the content has transformed them both academically and personally. I believe that the world right now is in desperate need of an education that equips individuals with both academic and personal development skills.
Before this course happened, I used to hate people from the bottom of my soul. But after this course, for the first time in my life, I can say that I no longer hate people. I can finally say that I no longer see people for their circumstances, but rather for who they are as people and who they can become.
The things that I learned in my early childhood about who I was not and who I was supposed to be. However, the course showed me the true identity of myself. It showed me that it was okay to be vulnerable. It showed me that it was okay to heal. And throughout the course, I have grown tremendously.
And the Unlearning course does that. I realized that the content was so powerfully transformative that it would be irresponsible, that it would be selfish for me not to share it with the world. Unlearning is really a course that I've been lecturing for 7 years, but I've made it bigger, I've made it better, and I'm excited to incorporate the performing arts. I do not believe that unlearning needs to be clinical and boring. We can also make unlearning entertaining and fun.
To anyone that would want to enroll in this course, it will not only benefit you academically, but also individually. It will assist you in presenting yourself as the true individual that you are, but it will also assist you in healing and journeying the life process.
This course was the missing puzzle piece that I needed in my journey of self-transformation and self-discovery. And most of all, this course taught me how to unlearn this toxic behavior and how to choose happiness and positivity in the present and to stop worrying about tomorrow.
The gift of this course is that it is universally applicable to any personal and professional contexts. Cornerstone, learn to change the world.
In this time of great uncertainty, there's one thing you can be certain of: your education. Our wide range of online programs let you upskill yourself and earn a leading-edge qualification from the comfort of your own home. We've been educating Africa for 50 years, so we know how to adapt to our forever-changing landscape. Learn to change the world and take control today. Speak to one of our student advisors. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to enroll now.